The darkness was suffocating, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. I couldn't see a thing. No light, no cracks to suggest escape. Just the heavy, oppressive blackness that seemed alive, swallowing every breath I took. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe as if the walls themselves were closing in. Panic clawed at my chest, and I screamed with everything I had left. "Help! Let me out!" My voice echoed back at me, mocking my desperation, but there was no response. No one came. No one cared. Then the music started, a low, haunting melody that slithered into the room like a snake, wrapping itself around my already fraying nerves. It wasn't soothing. It was sinister, each note dripping with foreboding. The silence between the notes felt heavier than the sound itself, as though the universe was holding its breath along with me. Every beat of the music made the atmosphere tenser, more unbearable. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst through my ribs. And then it hit me, the realization that froze my blood. This wasn't random. I wasn't trapped by some faceless stranger or locked away by accident. No, this was personal. Someone I knew, someone familiar, had done this to me. That knowledge sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through my veins. Who could hate me enough to do this? What had I done to deserve this torment? The question swirled in my mind, amplifying my fear. Was this revenge, a punishment, or simply cruelty for its own sake? Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the clapping began. Slow, deliberate applause, echoing faintly from somewhere far away, yet close enough to chill me to the bone. Each clap felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my soul, taunting me, mocking my helplessness. Were they watching me right now? Enjoying my suffering? The thought made bile rise in my throat, and I slammed my fists against whatever solid surface confined me, screaming until my throat burned raw. But nothing changed. No door opened, no savior arrived, just the endless cycle of despair. The grand ballroom was alive with the hum of anticipation. A sea of elegantly dressed guests gathered to witness what everyone assumed would be the crowning moment of Frank's life. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting shimmering light across tables adorned with white roses and gold accents. The air buzzed with whispers of excitement as Frank stood at the center of it all, his hands trembling slightly, but his expression resolute. He had spent months planning this proposal, envisioning Walker's radiant smile and tearful acceptance. But nothing could have prepared him for what came next. As he knelt down on one knee, holding out the velvet box containing an exquisite diamond ring, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to Walker, who stood frozen, her face unreadable. For a brief moment, hope flickered in Frank's chest. Perhaps she was just overwhelmed by emotion. Then, in a voice so cold it sent shivers through the crowd, she said flatly, "No, I do not." Gasps rippled through the audience like waves crashing against rocks. Some guests exchanged horrified glances. Others looked away, unable to bear the awkwardness of the scene unfolding before them. Frank's heart shattered into a million pieces right there on the marble floor, visible only to those who dared to look closely enough. But Walker wasn't done yet. Her lips curled into a cruel smirk, and she leaned forward slightly, her words slicing through the tension like a knife. "And by the way," she added casually, as if discussing the weather, "I've been sleeping with someone else. Someone you know quite well. Your greatest rival, actually." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint clinking of champagne glasses somewhere in the distance. Frank felt as though the ground beneath him had opened up and swallowed him whole. His rival, The man he'd competed against for years, both professionally and personally, had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. Frank staggered backward, clutching the edge of the table for support. His vision blurred as tears welled up in his eyes, threatening to spill over. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no words came out. Instead, he could only stare at Walker, searching her face for any sign of remorse or regret. There was none. She stood tall, unfazed by the chaos she had unleashed, her piercing gaze daring anyone to challenge her. Among the stunned spectators, Ruby watched from the sidelines, her own memories flooding back. She remembered the time Walker had rejected her invitation to prom years ago, brushing it off as though it meant nothing. Now, seeing Walker's callous demeanor reminded her of that same indifference, multiplied tenfold. It made her stomach churn. Was this who Walker truly was? A person incapable of genuine connection, willing to trample over anyone who dared to care about her? For Frank, the betrayal cut deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. Not only had Walker refused his heartfelt proposal, but she had also chosen to humiliate him publicly, twisting the knife further by revealing her affair with his nemesis. Every word she spoke felt like a punch to the gut, leaving him gasping for air. He thought of all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the late-night conversations, the promises whispered under the stars, and wondered how much of it had been a lie. Had she ever truly cared for him, or was he merely a pawn in her game of manipulation? As the reality of the situation sank in, Frank realized something even more devastating. Walker's actions weren't just about rejecting him. They were about asserting power. By choosing his rival, she had effectively declared war, ensuring that Frank would never recover from this blow. And as the first strains of music began to play again, a haunting melody that seemed to echo his despair, he knew he was trapped in a nightmare of her making. The room seemed to shrink as Ruby found herself cornered by a ghost from her past. It was him, the same boy she had once dismissed so carelessly in high school, the one who had mustered the courage to ask her to prom back in 2018. Now, years later, he stood before her, his presence both familiar and unsettling. His voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and accusatory. "Why wouldn't I? You invited me to prom back in the days, right?" He demanded, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Ruby's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of a memory she had long buried. She remembered it vaguely now, the way he had stammered nervously, holding out a corsage as if it were a fragile treasure. At the time, she had thought nothing of rejecting him, brushing off his invitation with a dismissive laugh. To her, he had been just another nameless face in the crowd, someone unworthy of her attention. But now, staring into his hardened expression, she realized how deeply her actions had scarred him. Her lips parted, but the words that came out were cold, almost mechanical. "I'm sorry that I turned you down," she said flatly, her tone devoid of any genuine remorse. "But honestly, I've already forgotten about it." The moment the words left her mouth, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Anger, hurt, and perhaps even a hint of betrayal. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked as though he might lash out. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You forgot? You forgot?" he repeated, the volume rising with each syllable. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to be humiliated like that? To stand there pouring my heart out only for you to laugh in my face?" His hands clenched into fists at his sides, trembling with restrained fury. Ruby flinched, but quickly masked her unease with a shrug. It was years ago, she replied coolly. People move on. You shouldn't hold on to things that don't matter anymore. Don't matter? He spat, incredulous. To you, maybe it didn't matter. But to me, it was everything. You didn't just reject me. You made me feel like I wasn't worth your time. Like I was nothing. His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the depth of his pain. For a fleeting second, Ruby felt a pang of guilt, but she shoved it aside, reminding herself that she owed him nothing. After all, hadn't life taught her that showing weakness only gave others power over you? Still, the weight of his words lingered, gnawing at the edges of her conscience. As the tension between them thickened, the faint strains of music began to play in the background, underscoring the emotional storm brewing within the room. The melody was haunting, mirroring the unresolved bitterness that hung in the air. Ruby glanced around, suddenly aware of the curious stares of other guests. They were watching, waiting to see how this drama would unfold. "You're pathetic," she finally snapped, her patience wearing thin. "If you can't get over something as trivial as a prom invite, then maybe you're the problem, not me." Her words landed like a slap, silencing him momentarily, but the look in his eyes, a mixture of rage and sorrow, told her that this confrontation was far from over. The argument erupted like a storm, fierce and unrelenting. It began with an accusation that cut deeper than either of them expected. Frank stood trembling, his voice shaking as he unleashed years of pent-up resentment. "How could you leave me at the altar?" he demanded, his words sharp enough to pierce through steel. "In front of everyone, my family, my friends, you humiliated me. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" His eyes burned with anger, but beneath it was a flicker of pain so raw it threatened to consume him. Walker didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms defiantly, her expression cold and unyielding. "You think I did that for fun?" She shot back, her tone laced with venom. "Maybe if you hadn't pushed me away first, I wouldn't have had to look for someone else. You abandoned me long before that day." Her words were a slap to his face, each syllable dripping with disdain. Frank staggered backward as though physically struck. "Abandoned you? When did I ever abandon you?" he shouted, incredulous. "I gave you everything. My time, my trust, my heart. And this is how you repay me? Oh, spare me your self-righteousness," Walker snapped, rolling her eyes. "You were too busy chasing your precious career to even notice I needed you. Remember that accident last month? The one where I almost died in the hospital?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying a rare moment of vulnerability. "Where were you, Frank?" "Oh, right. You were off celebrating some big promotion with your new colleagues." Meanwhile, I was lying there, alone, wondering if I'd ever see another sunrise. The room seemed to freeze as her revelation sank in. Frank's jaw dropped, his mind reeling. He had no idea about the accident. No one had told him. Had she really been on the brink of death while he partied with strangers? Guilt clawed at his chest, but pride quickly smothered it. "Why didn't you tell me?" he retorted, his voice rising. "If it was so important, why didn't you call me?" "Because I shouldn't have to beg for your attention," Walker screamed, her composure finally cracking. Tears streamed down her face, but her fury remained undiminished. "You made it clear where your priorities lie. So yes, I found someone who actually cared. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I couldn't keep waiting for scraps of affection from you." Their voices echoed off the walls, growing louder and more vicious with every exchange. The air was thick with hostility, each word a weapon aimed straight at the other's heart. Memories of their happier days flashed briefly in Frank's mind. The laughter, the promises. But they now seemed like cruel illusions, taunting him with what could never be reclaimed. Finally, exhausted and drained, Walker stepped back, her shoulders slumping under the weight of everything unsaid. "We were done then," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the pounding in both their ears. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Frank clenched his fists, fighting back tears of his own. "Fine," he spat, his voice breaking. "If that's how you feel, then we're done now." He turned away abruptly, unable to bear the sight of her anymore. As he walked out, the faint strains of music began to play again, a haunting melody that seemed to mock the ruins of their relationship. The music swelled into a cacophony of dissonant notes, each sound clashing against the next like shards of broken glass. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It was alive, pulsating with an energy that seemed to seep into every corner of the room. The melody twisted and turned unpredictably, mirroring the chaos unraveling in Walker's mind. She sat bolt upright on a strange bed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Where was she? How had she gotten here? Her head throbbed as fragments of disjointed memories flickered hazily before fading back into darkness. The last thing she could recall was arguing with Frank at some event. Had they been drinking? Had someone slipped something into her drink? Panic surged through her veins as she swung her legs over the side of the bed, trying to steady herself. The room spun around her, its dim lighting casting eerie shadows on unfamiliar walls. A cold sweat broke out across her skin as she frantically scanned her surroundings for clues. Nothing looked familiar. No belongings, no phone, just emptiness, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Her trembling hands reached out to touch the bedside table when something caught her eye. A crumpled piece of paper lying there. Picking it up, she unfolded it slowly, her breath hitching as she read the words scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Don't forget this." What did it mean? Forget what? The cryptic message sent chills crawling down her spine, amplifying her growing paranoia. Was this a warning? A threat? Or simply another cruel joke meant to toy with her sanity? Before she could process further, applause erupted from somewhere far away but unmistakably close enough to send shockwaves through her already fragile state. Clap after clap echoed mockingly, as if someone unseen was reveling in her terror. "Who's there?" Walker shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. But only silence answered her, punctuated by the relentless rhythm of the haunting music that continued to play. She stumbled toward the door, her legs wobbling beneath her. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though invisible weights were dragging her down. Reaching for the handle, she hesitated. What awaited her beyond that threshold? More confusion? Danger? She turned back to glance at the bed, half expecting to find some hidden detail, a clue perhaps, that would make sense of everything. Instead, all she saw was the note still clutched tightly in her hand, its ominous words burning themselves into her memory. As she stood frozen, torn between fight or flight, the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Whoever had orchestrated this nightmare knew her intimately. They knew how to push her buttons, how to twist her emotions until she teetered on the brink of collapse. And worst of all, they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The final act of this twisted drama unfolded in a dimly lit room where the remnants of shattered relationships lingered heavily in the air. Frank stood before Walker once again, his voice trembling with desperation as he made one last plea for reconciliation. "Do you, Miss Walker, agree to take Frank as a husband?" he asked, his tone tinged with both hope and resignation. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint echo of distant music, a haunting melody that seemed to mock their unraveling lives. Walker's response came swiftly and mercilessly, her words slicing through the tension like a blade. "No, I do not," she declared flatly, her expression unreadable. Her rejection hung in the air like a storm cloud, darkening the already oppressive atmosphere. For Frank, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of their relationship, a definitive end to any chance of redemption or forgiveness. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked as though he might collapse under the weight of his despair. Before either of them could say another word, a cold, unfamiliar voice cut through the room, sharp and commanding. "Get out of CIA, my God!" it barked, sending chills down their spines. The words were cryptic, yet they carried an undeniable urgency, hinting at secrets far darker than anything they had faced before. Who was speaking? And what did the mention of the CIA mean? Was it a metaphor? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Frank turned toward the source of the voice, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. But there was no reply, only the sound of applause erupting from somewhere unseen, slow and deliberate, as if mocking their suffering. Each clap reverberated through the room, amplifying the sense of dread that had settled over them. Walker, too, seemed shaken by the intrusion. Her earlier bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of vulnerability. She glanced around nervously, searching for answers but finding none. "What is going on?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of music and applause. No one responded. They were trapped in a surreal nightmare, unable to escape the web of lies and betrayal that had ensnared them. As the music swelled to a deafening crescendo, blending seamlessly with the rhythmic clapping, the scene dissolved into chaos. Shadows danced across the walls, distorting reality and leaving both Frank and Walker disoriented. Their attempts to make sense of the situation were futile. Every question led to more uncertainty. Every revelation uncovered new layers of deceit. In those final moments, the truth became painfully clear. Their relationships, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, were irreparably broken. Trust had been shattered beyond repair, replaced by bitterness and resentment. There would be no happy endings, no reconciliations, no second chances. Only the lingering specter of unresolved conflicts and unanswered questions. And then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the noise ceased. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of electricity buzzing in the background. Frank and Walker stood frozen, staring at each other in stunned disbelief. Neither dared to speak, afraid of what might come next. The future stretched before them like an endless void, filled with uncertainty and foreboding. Some people leave scars, others leave lessons. Burn and reborn stories that break you, then rebuild you.